Before marble, before empire, before even the name Rome meant anything, there was a boy in the mud, a brother in the wild, and a city waiting to be born. This is the story of Romulus, the founder who rose from river reeds and wolf's breath, the killer of kin, the king who vanished into legend. If you love history told like myth, and myth told like memory, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the past. Now let's begin. The wind howled over the Tiber, tugging at cloaks and whispers alike. In the ancient land of Latium, before emperors, before legions, before the marble sprawl of Rome, there was only mud, mist, and myth. And in the heart of that myth stood a throne soaked in ambition and betrayal. Alba Longa, a hilltop city cloaked in cloud and silence, ruled the land. Its king, Numitor, was a just ruler, well-loved, with silver in his beard and honor in his eyes. But justice invites envy, and Numitor's brother, Amulius, fed that envy until it became hunger. Hunger for power, hunger for control. One night, beneath flickering torchlight and behind the closed doors of his cold stone hall, Amulius acted. He overthrew Numitor. No battle, no warning. Just a bloodless coup in a world that knew little of mercy. The usurper wore the crown of Alba Longa, but fear lined the edges of it. He knew his hold on power was brittle, so he stripped Numitor's family of everything, land's honor, future. And when he looked to Rhea Silvia, Numitor's only daughter, he saw the potential spark of a bloodline reignited. To snuff it out, he made her a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity, sworn to the gods, sworn to never bear a child. But gods have never followed mortal laws. Rhea Silvia, alone in her sacred temple, dreamed of fire and wolves and stars falling into her arms. And then, according to legend, the god Mars, the god of war himself, visited her. Whether by force or fate, two sons were conceived. Not just children, symbols, echoes of vengeance and rebirth. Romulus and Remus. When Amulius heard, his blood ran cold. The old prophecy whispered that the descendants of Numitor would one day return to reclaim the throne. These twins, these cries in the dark, were the prophecy breathing. He gave the order. The infants must die. But even tyrants cannot always find willing hands to kill babes swaddled in innocence. So he chose a crueler path, death by nature. The twins were placed in a rough-hewn trough, a shepherd's feeding basin, and set adrift on the flood-swollen Tiber. It was early spring, and the river was angry with rain. It churned and crashed, roaring like some ancient beast guarding the edge of history. Down the current they drifted, small, fragile, and wrapped in destiny. But death, it seemed, had turned its back. The Tiber, swollen with fate, did not claim them. The wooden trough snagged in the tangled roots of a wild fig tree, caught in the silt near the Palatine Hill. The river receded, the storm passed, and the sun broke over the ancient stones. From the shadows of a nearby cave came a sound, not of man, but of myth. A she-wolf. Her eyes, yellow as lightning and deep as ancient earth, caught the movement. A growl curled in her throat. She approached, and then she stopped. The wolf did not strike. She did not tear or snarl or turn away. Instead, she sniffed, and then she nursed them. The mighty predator became a mother. Lupa, they would call her. She suckled the twins beneath the fig tree, her body curled around them like a shield of fur and fang. Each night, the stars above told a different story. But here, in the dirt, a new one was beginning. Days passed. A woodpecker brought food, another sacred symbol of Mars. The hill whispered with strange winds. Travelers passed, none daring to touch what the gods seemed to guard. Until one man did. A shepherd named Faustulus, tending his flock on the quiet hills of Latium, stumbled upon the scene. A wolf, 2 children, and a silence so thick it hummed. He waited until the wolf was gone. Then gently, he took the boys in his arms. They did not cry. They only stared, wide-eyed, golden-eyed, at the sky. Faustulus brought them home to his wife, Acca Larentia, who took them to her breast without hesitation. Together, the couple raised them, fed them, named them. Romulus, Remus. They grew not as princes, but as sons of earth. Sons of sheep and stone, of bark and blood and wind. But even then, before they knew who they were, they dreamed of something larger. They played as warriors. They built little forts of sticks and mud. They raced across the hills like wolves reborn. And the birds above them circled as if waiting for the first true kings of Rome to rise. The river that was supposed to be their grave had become their cradle. The wolf that was supposed to be their end had become their mother. And the land, untamed, raw, eternal, was waiting for its founders, for its fire, and for its legend to begin. She was not a symbol, not then, not yet. To the earth, the wind, and the moonlit forest, she was simply a beast, one among many. A creature with teeth meant for tearing and eyes forged for the dark. But to 2 abandoned boys, she became everything. The she-wolf moved like water, low and silent, her flanks rippling beneath her coat of shadow gray. She had lost her litter weeks before. Hunger gnawed at her bones, but something deeper haunted her. Emptiness, grief, an instinct that refused to vanish. And when she found the trough in the reeds, tangled in the arms of a fig tree, she did not pounce. She paused. The twins did not cry. Romulus stirred first, fists clenched in silence, his eyes searching the creature before him. Remus soon followed, mimicking his brother, always mirroring. The wolf lowered her snout, sniffing the damp cloth, the warm flesh beneath. She could have ended their story then. 2 bites, a crimson splash, and silence. Instead, she licked Romulus's forehead, then Remus's, and then she lay down beside them. From that day forward, the wolf returned to the fig tree each dusk, her body a shield against the creeping cold. Her milk gave them strength. Her breath gave them warmth. They suckled like pups, slept curled in her fur, knew no lullabies but her heartbeat, no comfort but her ribs, rising and falling like the ancient hills. The world outside that grove may have belonged to men and kings, but this clearing, this sacred pocket in the earth, belonged to something older, something divine. The ancient Latins would later tell the tale with awe and reverence, that a she-wolf, sacred to Mars, had nourished the founders of a city that would one day rule the world. They called her Lupa, but even that name, whispered through temples and carved into stone, cannot grasp the quiet truth. She was a mother. Romulus and Remus thrived beneath her care. Their bodies grew firm, their limbs nimble. They crawled before they walked, wrestled before they could speak. And even as infants, they bore the strange, storm-lit gaze of something touched by the divine. Other creatures came and went, birds wheeling above, foxes slinking through the grass. But none dared cross the line of scent the she-wolf drew around her domain. It was hers, and they were hers. Until one morning, when destiny came on 2 legs instead of 4. Faustulus, a humble shepherd tending his flock, came down to the river bend to water his goats. He had passed the fig tree before, always noting the strange stillness there. But today, the stillness was broken by sound. Soft grunts, sharp barks, and the unmistakable coo of human infants. He crept closer, and what he saw would echo for generations. 2 children, chubby and strong, nursed at the belly of a massive she-wolf. She did not flee when Faustulus stepped forward. She only watched. There was no snarl, no threat, only the acknowledgement of change, as if she knew her time as guardian had ended. Her yellow eyes lingered on Faustulus for a breath, then another. Then she rose and vanished into the woods. Faustulus approached the children, trembling. He had no family of his own, no legacy but sheep and silence. But in the faces of these boys, he saw something fierce, something fated. He scooped them into his arms and wrapped them in his cloak. They did not cry. They simply looked at him. One blinked. The other smiled. He brought them to his wife, Acca Larentia, a woman said to have been raised in the hard soil of Latium, with hands as calloused as a plowman's but a heart wide as the plains. She took one look at the twins and opened her arms. "Gods or beasts," she whispered. "They are ours now." And so they were raised in a shepherd's home, with nothing but stars for a ceiling and olive trees for walls. Romulus, the quieter one, watchful, intense, a storm waiting. Remus, the bolder, laughter ringing, fists ready, a flame dancing in the dusk. They played with sticks like they were swords, fought imaginary monsters in the fields, built thrones of stones and crowned each other kings. And though they knew not yet the truth of their birth, their blood sang each time they climbed a hill, each time they stared into the setting sun and wondered what lay beyond. The she-wolf was gone, but her spirit, wild, strong, unyielding, had rooted itself in their bones. They were no longer babes lost to fate. They were boys forged by nature, watched by gods, and destined for greatness. They were wolves in human skin, and Rome was already stirring in their dreams. The sun rose over the hills of Latium, washing golden light across the scrubby grass and the weather-worn stones. From the mouth of a cave to the wide-bellied meadows, two shadows darted, laughing, yelling, wrestling like young wolves let loose. Romulus and Remus, boys born not into wealth or palaces, but into the soil, the wind, and the hard-earned wisdom of shepherds. Faustulus taught them to track the stars by night and the hoofprints of goats by day. He showed them how to whittle spears from river reeds and how to judge the sky for storms. His voice was steady, his lessons simple, but he never spoke of where they came from. Not fully, not yet. Still, there were hints. In the way Acca Larentia would sometimes stroke their hair in silence. In the way villagers whispered when they passed. In the dreams Romulus had, of wolves and rivers and crowns of fire. They grew strong, wild, fearless. By the time they were teenagers, no one could best them in foot races or fistfights. They herded flocks by day and hunted boars by night. But more than anything, they built things. With stones and mud, they raised mock fortresses, crafted gates, dug trenches. Even as boys, they played at cities. Romulus especially. He was meticulous, always measuring, always watching how things held together or fell apart. Remus, ever the louder flame, preferred motion. He leapt walls rather than built them, dared the steeper slopes, took risks Romulus would calculate, then follow with quiet resolve. And though they fought as brothers do, over games, food, pride, they always found their way back to one another. Twin sparks, twin storms, two halves of a single unrelenting will. Then came the day the shepherds from Numitor's court crossed into their territory. The older boys had stolen cattle, laughing as they passed through Romulus and Remus's grazing lands. They didn't expect resistance, but what they met was fury. Romulus organized the ambush. Remus led the charge. It was no battle. It was a message. The twin brothers not only retrieved the stolen herd, but dragged the ringleaders back to the village, bruised and humiliated. That night, beneath the stars, the two sat by the fire. "You could be a king," Remus said, tossing a stick into the flame. Romulus didn't smile. He stared into the sparks. "So could you." But the next confrontation would not be so simple. Word of their strength, of their growing influence among the hill people, had reached the wrong ears. One of the captured herdsmen, humiliated, spread rumors in Alba Longa that a pair of wild brothers ruled like princes beyond the forest, that they defied noblemen, that they stirred loyalty like fire stirs air. And when those rumors reached King Amulius, the usurper who had long ago tried to drown his fate in a river, he felt a chill rise in his gut. It was happening. The prophecy. The bloodline of Numitor was rising from the mud. He sent guards to investigate. They came not with questions, but chains. Remus was caught first, ambushed while scouting for firewood. He fought like an animal, but there were too many. They beat him, bound him, dragged him through the dirt like a conquered dog. Romulus returned to the clearing to find his brother gone. Blood in the grass. The signs of a struggle burned into the soil. Faustulus knew. He said nothing at first, but that night, when Romulus pressed him, trembling with rage, the old shepherd finally spoke. "You were never meant for this life," he said, eyes glistening. "You are sons of Rhea Silvia, grandsons of Numitor." Romulus froze. "The king?" he asked. Faustulus nodded slowly. "The rightful king. Amulius stole everything, and now he fears what you are becoming." Romulus did not cry. He stood, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Then let him fear me." He left at dawn, cloak trailing like smoke, his hands curled into fists, alone but not uncertain. Remus was being held in Alba Longa, and Romulus was going to bring him back, not as a shepherd, not as a boy, but as a storm the old king would not escape. The wolves had been raised. Now, they would hunt. Alba Longa sat like a crown of stone above the valley, its ancient walls carved from the mountain's bones. The streets were quiet, but tension clung to every corner, like a breath held too long. Behind those walls, Remus lay in chains, bruised, unbowed, and Romulus was coming. He moved fast and silent, a shadow among the olive trees. The boy raised by wolves was no stranger to wild terrain, and the paths to Alba Longa were carved deep into his memory from childhood tales and faded dreams. But this time, it wasn't curiosity that guided him. It was fire. Faustulus, too, had made a choice. The old shepherd left the hills and walked straight into the heart of Alba Longa, not as a peasant, but as a witness. He carried no weapons, only truth. And he brought it to one man, the rightful king, Numitor. Time had aged him. His back was bent, his eyes weary, but the fire had not left them. He ruled nothing now, not a city, not a people, not even his own household, but he still listened with a king's ears. When Faustulus told him about the twins, his eyes narrowed. "You say they are mine?" he whispered. Faustulus nodded. "Sons of Rhea Silvia, born of Mars, hidden by my brother's fear." Numitor said nothing, only closed his eyes, and the silence that followed was not grief, it was strategy. Meanwhile, Remus sat in a stone chamber beneath the palace. The air stank of damp and mold. Rats skittered. He paced like a caged lion. Every time the guards mocked him, he stared back with a grin that made them uneasy. "You don't even know who I am," he said once after they spat at his feet. "No," one of them sneered, "but you'll be forgotten soon enough." Remus smiled wider. "I was born of wolves," he said softly. "I don't die in cages." Outside the city, Romulus had reached the edge of Alba Longa's eastern gate. He didn't knock. He didn't plead. He climbed, stone by stone, quiet as snowfall. The city had grown soft under Amulius's rule. The guards were lazy, half-drunk, sun-dazed. Romulus slipped through like wind. Inside, Numitor was already moving. He summoned Amulius. "Let me speak to the prisoner," Numitor said calmly. "Let me judge this shepherd boy for myself." Amulius narrowed his eyes. Suspicion flickered, but he relented. After all, Numitor was no threat. A broken king, an old man, a shell, or so he thought. Remus was brought before Numitor in a chamber where sunlight spilled through a lattice of carved marble. The guard stepped back, and for the first time, the two looked at each other. Bloodline meeting bloodline across generations. "Your name?" Numitor asked. "Remus." "Your mother?" "I never knew her." "And your brother?" Remus smiled. "Romulus, and if he isn't already inside your walls, he soon will be." Numitor studied him, then reached forward, brushed his thumb along the boy's brow. "You have your mother's eyes," he whispered. The moment shattered like glass. Guards shouted outside the chamber, steel clashed, and Romulus stepped through the doorway, breathing like a storm contained in skin. Sweat on his brow, dust on his hands. But no fear, only fury. The guards raised their weapons. Numitor barked a single word. "Stop!" The room froze. Romulus crossed the floor to Remus. No words. Just the clasp of forearms, the press of foreheads. Then they turned to Numitor. "You know who we are," Romulus said. "I do." "And he knows," Romulus added, nodding toward the halls above. "Your brother, Amulius." "He will not give up his crown," Numitor said. Romulus's jaw clenched. "Then we'll take it." That night, beneath the flickering torches of Alba Longa's oldest hallways, the truth moved like a whisper through the stones. Servants who remembered Numitor. Soldiers who had waited too long for courage. Priests who heard the name of Mars and felt their spines straighten. The city was remembering. By dawn, it was done. Amulius, panicked and desperate, tried to flee, but the guards, his own guards, stood aside. He was dragged before the people, screaming of treachery and lies. Remus stood behind him, Romulus stood beside him, and Numitor stood above him. There were no trials in those days, only reckoning. Romulus spoke. "You tried to drown us." Remus added, "You tried to bury us." Numitor whispered the final word, "Enough." And just like that, Amulius, tyrant, usurper, murderer, was gone. His blood soaked the same stone floors he once claimed as his own. The people chanted Numitor's name, but their eyes were already turning toward the twins, toward the storm-born boys of wolf and war. And though their grandfather now wore the crown again, it was clear who the future belonged to. Not the past, not the palace, but the brothers who had come from mud, from milk, from myth, and who were ready to build something the world had never seen. The sun had not yet burned away the morning mist when Alba Longa awoke to a silence unlike any before. No horn sounded, no soldiers marched. The city held its breath, because something sacred had shifted. The tyrant was dead, and justice, long buried under stone and silence, had returned. Amulius had ruled with suspicion, not strength. His reign was one of chained voices and dulled blades, of priestesses watched and whispers punished. But when his blood stained the marble steps of the palace, thick and crimson like rust washing from ancient iron, the people did not weep. They exhaled. Word spread quickly, as it does in all places too long held in fear. First through servants, then the tradesmen, then the outer hill farmers who came in droves to witness what they thought they'd never see. Numitor stood once more on the royal dais, aged but proud, robed not in gold but in the truth of a line nearly broken. And beside him, Romulus and Remus, no longer merely the sons of a murdered princess, no longer wild boys from the hills, but symbols, living vengeance, living promise. Numitor raised his hand, and the crowd stilled. "Long ago," he said, "my brother seized this city through deceit. He broke our family. He defiled our gods. But now, by the strength of his grandsons, my daughter's sons, he is no more." He looked out at the masses. "This city will remember him as a shadow, but it will remember these two as dawn." The people erupted, not with the polite applause of courts, but with the roar of the liberated. The fall of Amulius was not just the death of a tyrant, it was the cracking of a dam. And behind that dam, for years, dreams had been gathering. Visions of a different kind of city, a place born not of inheritance, but of merit, of purpose, of blood, yes, but also of brotherhood. Yet Romulus and Remus did not stay in Alba Longa. They restored Numitor's throne, kissed their grandfather's weathered cheek, and turned their eyes elsewhere. Not north, where Etruscan kings held sway. Not south, where Greek colonies already spread culture and commerce. But west, to the untamed hills where the Tiber curved like a sleeping serpent. To the place where their lives had begun. Back to the fig tree. Back to the wolf's cave. Back to destiny. "I dreamed of a wall," Romulus said one night as they camped along the river's edge. "A city built here, a fortress of law." Remus laughed. "A wall? Around what? Rocks and trees?" Romulus didn't smile. "Around something that lasts." They walked the land, barefoot in some places, eyes narrowed in others. The Palatine Hill, the Aventine, the slow bend of the river like an arm cradling fate. They spoke to old men who lived in huts there, to hunters who had never sworn loyalty to any crown. And the more they saw, the more they agreed. This would be their beginning. Not Alba Longa, too soaked in old blood and older fears, but here, where the wild still ruled. They gathered men, other shepherds, exiles, freed slaves. Not nobles, not citizens, but those who wanted to build. Men who saw in Romulus not just a warrior, but a founder. In Remus, not just a fighter, but a flame. And soon, campfires dotted the hills. Stones were laid, trenches dug, huts framed in raw timber and daub. Romulus outlined a sacred boundary, what he called a pomerium, a line that would mark the future walls of the city. "No man crosses this without blood," he said. "This line is life itself." Remus smirked. "Even me?" Romulus met his eyes. "Especially you." But beneath the laughter, tension grew. For the first time, the brothers saw different visions. Romulus wanted order, structure, a king. Remus wanted freedom, equality. No crowns, just community. And though the people loved them both, they would soon be asked to choose. But for now, the dream held. The tyrant had fallen. And in his place, a new fire had risen. Not in the halls of Alba Longa, but in the hills where two boys had once suckled from a wolf, where myth had become blood, and blood now whispered, Rome. They stood atop the Palatine Hill side by side, as dawn unfurled across the land in waves of amber and violet. Below them, the river glinted like a blade. To the west, the sea whispered in the farthest reaches of the morning haze. And between those two vast ends of the world, nothing. Nothing but open hills, wild fig trees, and silence. This was the beginning. Here, they would build. But first, they would dream. Romulus knelt and pressed his palm into the soil. "This land remembers us," he said. Remus nodded, still watching the horizon. "Because it made us." They had returned to the place of their first breath, where the she-wolf had nursed them, where Faustulus had found them swaddled in prophecy. Now, no longer boys, no longer fugitives. They would shape that soil into legacy. Alba Longa had been reclaimed. Their grandfather wore the crown once more, but they had declined his offer to remain and rule beside him. No, Romulus had said, that throne belongs to the past. The future, Remus added, belongs to the hills. And so they returned not as refugees, but as founders. The people followed, not just those loyal to Numitor, not just shepherds and hunters, but all kinds. Exiles from petty kings, thieves looking to start over, freed slaves hungry for their own soil, young men with nothing but their fists and their faith. They brought little, they asked for less, but they believed. And belief is a kind of stone. With it, they began to build. First came the clearing. Trees felled, roots torn, ground leveled. Then came the fire pits, then the trenches. Walls of mud brick and thatched roofs rose with the sun. It was no grand city yet. Not Rome, not the eternal, but it was breath, it was heartbeat, it was home. Romulus marked the sacred center with a plow, dragging the blade in a slow, unbroken circle. He called it the Pomerium, the spiritual boundary that would define and protect the city. This is where Rome will stand, he said. This line is inviolable. Remus grinned, arms folded. And who says so? I do. That moment lingered in the air like static, a pause, a beat, the faintest beginning of something neither of them could name. And then laughter. The early days were hard. There was little food, no roads, and many arguments. But each obstacle became a kind of baptism, each wound a ritual. As the city rose stone by stone, the brothers' reputations swelled with it. They judged disputes, led hunts, mediated feuds, and slowly order took root. Romulus was methodical. Every wall had a purpose, every rule a reason. He believed in symbols, in rituals, in hierarchy. He dreamed of temples and armies, of a city with laws that outlasted lifetimes. Remus was fire, charisma. He spoke to the people, walked among them, reminded them to laugh. He believed in the raw soul of the city, the blood in its cheeks, the breath in its chest. Together, they were balance. But balance does not last. The old men began to whisper. Who would lead once the city was done? Would it be Romulus, builder, planner, sword in the dark? Or Remus, voice of the people, smile like flame, heart like a drum? Even the earth seemed to stir uneasily beneath them. One night, around a fire still wet with the day's rain, the brothers argued, not as boys, not as jest, but as men. You're already building your throne, Remus snapped, but no one has crowned you. Romulus didn't flinch. Because no one else sees what I see. We are not building a camp. We are building a kingdom. Remus stood. Then where do I fit in that kingdom? As what? Your shadow? Silence. Not the soft kind. The heavy, final kind. But still they worked. Because the dream was bigger than the wound. In those early months, the settlers planted crops, dug wells, trained dogs and sons alike. Wolves still howled at night, but fewer now. The wild was retreating, not out of fear, but out of respect. The land had chosen, and it had chosen them. Romulus continued carving the Pomerium, the sacred trench that would one day cradle Rome's first walls. It was both a prayer and a boundary, a circle drawn not just in dirt, but in spirit. It was meant to keep the sacred in, and the chaos out. But chaos does not wait patiently outside lines, especially when it shares your blood. They say you can hear it in the wind, the sound of destiny as it sharpens its blade. On the 7th day of spring, beneath a bruised sky, and in the shadow of olive trees just beginning to bloom, Romulus drew the final line. The trench curved in a complete circle, encircling sacred earth. It was not just a boundary, it was an oath. This, he declared, is Rome. No trumpets, no marble, no gods descending from the clouds. Just mud, stone, sweat, and silence so deep you could hear a crow's wing beat 100 paces off. Romulus stood with a plow in hand, oxen waiting. Behind him, settlers held torches, and somewhere in the crowd Remus watched, arms folded, expression unreadable. The ritual began. With solemn steps, Romulus guided the plow around the pomerium. The earth turned beneath the blade. A furrow opened. Sacred ground took shape. No man was to cross it. It was the breath of the city, its soul, and Romulus had given it life. But Remus had doubts. "What makes your line more sacred than the rest of us?" he asked later, voice edged with heat. "It's not my line," Romulus answered. "It's Rome's." "And who gave you Rome?" Remus shot back. Romulus didn't respond. He didn't need to. The people already had. The divide between them grew. It was quiet at first, small disagreements over food distribution, leadership roles, temple placements, but the city could feel it. Like a fault line beneath stone, waiting to split. Even the settlers began to take sides. Some rallied behind Romulus, the lawgiver, the founder, the mind behind the dream. Others whispered of Remus, the soul of the city, the fire that warmed it, the brother who walked among them like one of their own. And then came the day that shattered the bond. Remus stood at the edge of the sacred trench. The wall had just begun, little more than a rise of packed mud and timber scaffolds. But it was real, tangible, a beginning. Romulus stood nearby, eyes dark. "Don't," he said. But Remus only smiled, and then he leapt. Over the trench, over the wall, over the line, gasps filled the air. Settlers froze. The torches flickered like hearts in panic. Romulus stared. "Why?" he whispered. Remus's smile flickered. "To show your wall is just dirt, like all walls." Romulus moved without thinking. A strike, a flash of bronze, a gasp, and then silence. Remus collapsed, his hand reaching toward the earth, his breath shallow, the smirk gone. Blood spilled across the line. Romulus fell to his knees beside him. Remus looked up, eyes wide. "You really think you can build something without me?" Romulus didn't answer. He only wept. The settlers buried Remus just outside the pomerium, beneath a tree that had once shaded their games as boys. There was no funeral pyre, no grand speech, only the wind, and the city that waited to be built. Romulus returned to the wall the next morning. He said nothing. He took up the plow again, and he began to dig. Stone by stone, Rome rose. Its first buildings were crude, huts, watchposts, fences reinforced with vines. But its spirit was sharp, not polished, but raw, not holy, but haunted. A city not of angels, but of wolves. Romulus called for more men. He opened the gates to the outcasts of every tribe. Runaways, debtors, escaped slaves, criminals. He did not ask who they were, only who they wanted to become. And they came, in droves, to a city with no past, only fire in its lungs. The laws he wrote were simple, harsh, forged in memory and loss. No man could cross the pomerium armed. No man could claim another's freedom. No insult would be forgotten, but every loyalty would be rewarded. He named his new people Romans and made himself king, not with ceremony, but with silence. He wore no crown, sat on no golden throne, but his voice shaped stone, his law bent blades, and Rome bent to no one. Yet in the quiet moments when the torches dimmed and the stars peeked through the smoky veil above the Palatine, Romulus would stand alone, staring out over the wall, toward the place where Remus had fallen. He had founded a city, but he had buried a brother, and every empire, every triumph, every marble column to come would rise upon that wound. It was said the gods turned away the moment Romulus raised his hand, that Mars, the father of the twins, clenched his fists on Olympus, that the she-wolf, wherever she had gone, howled into the wind so loud that trees shook. But on Earth, there was only stillness. Remus lay on the ground, blood seeping into the dirt that would one day be called Rome. And Romulus stood frozen. He had struck not a stranger, not a traitor, but his brother, his mirror, his past, his anchor. They had fought side by side. They had slept under the same sky, shared the same mother's name. And now, Romulus had drawn a line that could not be undone. He did not speak at Remus's burial. He could not. Instead, he built. Stone by stone, as if he could bury his guilt beneath foundations, as if walls could atone, as if each timber placed would quiet the memory of his brother's final breath. But it never did. Even the men around him, those who hailed him king, could see the change. Romulus was no longer a boy dreaming in the hills, or a warrior with fire in his chest. He had become something harder, sharper. He ruled not with warmth, but with will. And yet, the city grew, faster than any had expected. The settlement spread across the Palatine, its huts transforming into ordered rows of homes. A forum emerged, a space where laws could be spoken and oaths sworn. The first temple was framed with logs, humble and open to the sky. Rome was rising, but it was lonely. For Romulus, there was no one to share the firelight with. No echo of laughter in the dark. No voice to challenge his silence. He spoke only when he had to. He ate with soldiers. He slept little. And yet he was adored. To the people, he was not just king, he was founder. Shepherd of wolves, man of iron and vision. Children learned his name before they knew their own. Wives blessed their sons with it. Old men carved it into walking sticks and doorposts. But Romulus knew the cost of empire. It was not gold, not blood. It was solitude. Still, he worked. He established laws that defined the soul of the city. Unity before tribe, strength before comfort, the sacredness of oaths, and the sanctity of the wall. He invited neighboring peoples to settle. He promised asylum to all who sought it. Criminals, exiles, wanderers. Rome would be a city of second chances, of new beginnings, of wolves who had nowhere else to go. But there was one problem left. The city had men, but no women. And so Romulus devised a plan. He sent envoys to the nearby Sabines, inviting them to a great festival. Food, music, sport, a celebration of peace and prosperity. They came, whole families, hundreds of them, filling the hills with laughter and color. Then at Romulus's signal, the Romans seized the Sabine women. Not violently, not bloodily, but without consent. A crime disguised as ceremony, a marriage forged with stolen choice. The Sabine men fled in fury, vowing vengeance. But Romulus calmed his people. He spoke to the women with strange gentleness, promising respect, family, equality in this new nation. And over time, many accepted their place. Not with joy, but with acceptance. And then, something stranger happened. They began to believe. When the Sabine men returned to make war, the women, now wives and mothers, stood between the armies. They begged for peace, for unity, for the life they had forged, even if it had begun with force. And Romulus, ever the builder, ever the pragmatist, agreed. He made peace with the Sabine king, Titus Tatius. The two ruled together for a time, a co-kingship, a shared throne. But peace never holds when the foundation is blood and betrayal. Titus died under suspicious circumstances, and Romulus ruled alone once more. The city he built was no longer a promise. It was reality. Walls encircled it, armies defended it. Streets named after its founder spread like veins from its heart. Rome had risen. But Romulus rarely smiled, not since Remus, not since the sacred line ran red. He would walk the walls at night, alone, hand brushing the stone, listening, as if hoping to hear a voice that once laughed beside him, a voice now lost to the soil, but never to the story. He stood above them, not with robes of silk, nor with jeweled crown, but with the silence of a mountain and the stare of a wolf. Romulus, the first king of Rome, not elected, not inherited, created, forged in the floodwaters of the Tiber, raised by a beast, tempered in brotherhood, and hardened by sacrifice. His rule was absolute, but it did not begin with arrogance. Rather, it began with fire, and fire must be fed. He divided his growing city into wards, not by bloodline, but by loyalty. He established the Curiate Assembly, a council where the voices of tribes could be heard, though his word remained law. He welcomed outsiders still, Latins, Etruscans, even enemy warriors. All who bleed for Rome are Romans, he declared. It was a kingdom, yes, but more than that, it was an idea, a gathering of wolves under one banner. Rome grew hungry. Romulus gave it war, not out of bloodlust, but survival. Surrounding cities had begun to fear Rome's rise. They called it a den of thieves, of bandits, of bastards. Romulus did not argue. He led his men into battle, and he won. Sabines, Fidenets, Veientes, each fell, not through overwhelming strength, but through precision, strategy, and the ferocity of men who believed in something bigger than themselves. Romulus often rode at the front, cloak whipping behind him like smoke. His sword did not gleam. It was chipped and dark with use, but no one questioned its bite. He gave the conquered a choice: bend and be remade, or resist and be forgotten. Most chose to bend. With each victory, Rome swelled. What began as a ring of huts became streets, markets, forums. Stone walls replaced wooden ones. Temples were raised to Jupiter, Mars, and Vesta, but among them stood a single unmarked altar, a silent place where no god's name was spoken, only a brother's. In private, Romulus still mourned Remus, not with words, not with tears, but with quiet rituals. A cup left untouched, a single stone placed at the old fig tree, a habit of speaking aloud in empty rooms. To his people, he was a legend still alive. To himself, he was a man slowly vanishing into myth. Years passed. The city hardened. Its borders reached farther. And Romulus, now older, though still strong, found himself surrounded by men who owed him everything, but who no longer remembered where it all began. Some called him a tyrant behind closed doors. Others feared his growing obsession with immortality. He spoke more often of the gods, of signs, of storms in the bones of birds, of thunder in the echo of footsteps. One day, as he addressed the Senate near the marshes of the Campus Martius, a sudden storm broke. Lightning tore the sky in half. Winds screamed. Dust and shadow swallowed the gathering. And when the storm passed, Romulus was gone. Vanished. Not a trace. Not a footprint. Some claimed the gods had taken him. Others whispered that the senators had struck him down, fearing his power, his growing silence, his descent into godhood. But none could prove it. In time, the legend hardened. Romulus, it was said, had ascended. A light brighter than flame, a voice like thunder, a shape wreathed in storm cloud. The Romans called him Quirinus, a god, a guardian of the city he had built from mud and fire. But others remembered something else. Not the king, not the god, but the boy, running through fig trees, wrestling his brother, chasing the wind. They remembered the howl in his heart, the silence in his grief, and the stone that marked where a brother once stood, on the wrong side of a line drawn in dirt. Rome stood taller with every year, but Romulus, he had already become eternal. They searched for him for days. The Senate combed the hills, the riverbanks, the sacred groves. Soldiers paced the streets of Rome, torches in hand, calling the name of a king who no longer answered. Romulus was gone. Not slain, not buried, gone, like mist in sunlight, like a breath carried away by the wind. The men who had followed him into battle, who had knelt as he shaped the city from dust, now stood stunned, bereft of direction, yet strangely uplifted, as if his absence was not a loss, but a transformation. One senator, Julius Proculus, claimed to have seen him. He stood before the people and swore, "I saw Romulus on the road to Alba Longa. He appeared not as flesh, but as light, his face radiant, his form wreathed in fire and cloud. He said to me, 'Go and tell the Romans, by will and arms, I built your city. Now I rise to the heavens, to guard it forever as Quirinus.'" The crowd fell to their knees, not in mourning, in reverence. A man had become a god, not by decree, but by disappearance. Shrines to Quirinus rose across Rome. Offerings of figs and iron were laid at his feet. Children were taught that their founder walked the skies now, watching, judging, waiting. The first Roman among gods. But somewhere, perhaps in the hush of twilight, or in the whisper of the wind across Palatine Hill, others wondered. Was he taken? Or did he choose to vanish? Did Romulus ascend? Or did the man who had sacrificed everything simply walk away? Because he had given all. His childhood, his peace, his brother. He had built a city, yes, but what does it cost to build something that lasts forever? The stories changed with the generations. In some, he is divine from birth, Mars' son, flame incarnate, never truly mortal. In others, he is tragic, a haunted soul who rose from mud and madness to forge an empire, only to be devoured by its weight. And in the oldest tales, told in quiet corners and fireside hush, he is something simpler. A boy who once suckled at the belly of a wolf. A brother who drew a line in the dirt and crossed it in blood. A king who stood alone on the wall he built. But what cannot be denied is this. From nothing, he made something. From exile, a home. From grief, a nation. And from his own bones, he carved a myth that would outlive gods. Rome would go on to conquer the world, to raise emperors, philosophers, tyrants, saints. But before all of it, before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, before Cicero spoke in marble halls, before gladiators bled in the Colosseum, there was Romulus, a child of wolves, a killer of kin, a builder of eternity. And though his body was never found, Rome is his tomb. Its walls echo with his footsteps. Its laws remember his hand. Its sky still bears his name. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the legend and legacy of Romulus. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the weight of the myth and the man, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more cinematic explorations of history's greatest figures. Rome was not built in a day, but tonight, together, we walked its first breath. Until next time, keep your eyes on the past. It still speaks.